All right, welcome to the Loving People podcast. We are your hosts, Patrick
and Rita,
and our goal is to point you to Jesus and all struggles of this life. Now, we've been covering, season 1 was all on emotions, and that feels like forever ago.
It does.
But really, we've been talking about family. We've been talking about what it looks like to live within a family and singleness and all kinds of dynamics surrounding those relationships. And so with that, part of family is finding yourself in the marriage, however many years later, all the kids have left the house and we're left with what?
Each other.
And the
Lots
empty
of
nest.
quiet.
And this is the phase, known as the empty nest, which is what we're going to be talking about today. And one thing that I learned a few years back was one of the most common times for a couple to get divorced, if it's not early on in marriage, I think most marriages don't even make it past 5 years these days, then kind of the next most common time is the empty nest. And so that's something that we've really got to talk about. If that's one of the most common times to get divorced, I think this is a subject that requires some attention.
Yes.
Intentional attention. So research, it indicates that divorce rates among couples aged 50 and older, they have doubled since the 90s. For those aged 65 and older, those rates have nearly tripled. And they researchers, psychologists, all the experts we could say, which we are not, they say this trend is associated with the empty nest. And man, what a scary thing. So the empty nest, before we really get into empty nest syndrome, what is it? So as kids leave, parents are left with an empty house, empty schedule, so much time on their hands, the sadness over that stage of life being over. You don't get to get up in the morning and make your kid's favorite sandwich. I know my mom we called them fluffernutters, and she made it was peanut butter and marshmallow fluff. And I ate so many of those as a child growing up. I know that explains a lot, right? But after all that, you're not shuttling your kids to the practices anymore, whether that's piano practice or a football practice, softball practice, basketball. We're shuttling our kids to cheer and gymnastics and dance right now. When all that's done, you're left when you get home from work, you're sitting at the dinner table and you're looking across at this person you've been married to for maybe 25 years, but you're thinking, who is this person? Because you've been so wrapped up in your child's life. And I know this is the empty nest syndrome.
Correct.
Right. And I know you want to share a little bit about the empty nest syndrome.
I think that when we are raising our families, we are so busy. We're so tied up in everything that they're involved in that we just bury ourselves in their lives. Mm-hmm. And while the Bible teaches us that we're to make God first always, our spouse is to be second, and those kids are supposed to come third. That's not how it happens in America. No. Those kids take that first spot in so many lives. Dad's busy working, making a living. Mom is busy tending to the needs of the children. And it's all day, every day. And you start in the mornings getting up and getting them around and getting them going until finally you fall into bed at night. And that season of life is just hectic. Mm-hmm. And you find yourself thinking, I don't know if I can do this. And you're so consumed with it. But while the days are long, the years are very short. And when we look at it from God's perspective, we see that this time that we are loaned these children from God, He gives them to us for us to raise, but they're His. Yeah. We have to remember that. So as we go through and we do this, by the time that last one walks out the door, you sit down in your chair and you look across the room and you see that spouse and you go, who is this person? Or they'll say something and you'll go, I didn't know you like that. I didn't know you didn't like that. What happened? You don't know that person anymore. And you find yourself sitting in the evening, either the two of you sitting in a room together, and you're so absorbed either in a box on the wall called a television or a box in your hand called a cell phone, and you're not communicating. So that separation becomes greater and greater. And when the kids aren't there to fill the time, that silence is very loud. And so you have to go back and you have to say, okay, if I'm headed into that period of time, what am I going to do to create an atmosphere where we can begin to know each other again? Or if you find yourself there, okay, we need to reconnect. What can we do to do this? And I think that it has to be intentional.
Yeah, intentional is the word of the day. I mean, man, we need to be intentional in calling out this problem that we see in American society.
Yep.
And we need to be intentional in remedying that. I mean, it's not going to just happen by saying, hey, this is a problem. We got to move forward in our individual marriages and figure out what does that look like for us. So I know we've got empty nest syndrome written down here. There are some things that are correlated with that. Sometimes a person may no longer feel like they have purpose, right?
That's right. But when we go back and we look at what the Bible says, our purpose in life is what?
To glorify God.
To glorify God.
Okay, I was like, I hope I got that right.
You got that right. That is our sole purpose in this life.
Yeah.
In everything we do. I don't care if you are a homemaker, if you are a clerical worker, if you're a pastor, if you're an attorney or a doctor or a judge, or I don't care who you are. Your purpose for creation was to bring glory to God. And you can do all of these other things. School teachers do so many good things. But if you don't bring honor and glory to the Lord in doing that, it's wasted.
Yeah.
Every bit of it. So we have to remember our individual purposes are to bring honor and glory to Him. In that, if we're doing that, we are going to be open to build a better relationship with our spouse.
Yep.
We are going to find a purpose together, whether it's serving together, whether it is financially giving together, whether it is supporting the other one. Excuse me. Oh, you want me up? I'm sorry. My husband is the Sebastian County Coroner. Part of my role, my purpose in life right now is supporting him. As he goes out and he ministers to people, I don't have that opportunity. And so my job is, when he calls and says, I have a suicide I'm going on, I begin to pray for that family. I began to think about, okay, Lord, what's your purpose? What do you want? Give Kenny what he needs as he goes. That's part of my purpose in Empty Nest. When I was raising kids and I was chasing kids, we didn't communicate to the point that I didn't always know what he was up to, what he was doing. So in that, you have to come back and you have to say, okay, Lord, this is a new era that I'm living in. What's the purpose? Yeah. I want to bring honor to you. And how can I do that? I can do that by supporting my spouse, by listening to him when he needs to debrief. I can do that by keeping supper warm when he's gone during the mealtime. There's lots of things you can do, but you have to be intentional in it.
Yes. There's that word of the day again.
It is, and that's the key to it.
The one, the only, Kenny Stadler, I mentioned this to you the other day. As I was a 19-year-old guy that was just really kind of figuring out where's my life leading me. I remember going and asking him just some counsel for what does the future look like. And he said, Patrick, your purpose is the same as anybody else in this world, to glorify God. Isaiah 43:7. We were created for God's glory.
That's right.
He said, but your plan may look a little different. Everybody has the same purpose, but everybody has a different plan. And, if our purpose is to glorify God, and we're in a marriage, the plan is going to be similar. Well, to come together as spouses and do that. But what that looks like, for some, that may be, hey, let's start doing some hiking. Let's start getting some mountain biking going. Let's travel together. That plan may look a little different.
That's right. I think, too, in that plan, we have to be intentional with our communication.
Yes.
We have to, when you're dating, you are putting your best foot forward. And I told my daughter not too long ago, this is as good as it gets. When you're dating, this is as good as it gets. It's all downhill from here. and we laughed about that. And I said, you really need to pay attention, because the other person is putting their best foot forward while you're dating. They're being their best self, because they want you to like them. Yeah. After you get married, that doesn't always happen. And so we have to go back to, we have to find out who the other person is. We have to talk to them. We have to say, what are your hopes? What are your dreams? What do you want? What are you afraid of? Mm-hmm. And what I'm afraid of now is different than what I was afraid of when I was 20.
Wow.
So
you can expect, after raising these kids, and once they go out of the house, once you hit that empty nest phase, to go back to where you were when you were dating, because this person has changed a little bit over the course of those years.
We've changed a lot.
Yeah.
Life has happened in these last 20 to 30 years. So we have changed along that way. And I'll use Kenny and I as an example. He worked out of town a lot. When the kids were little, I was here at home with them. He came in on weekends and went back out on Mondays. There was a lot of time that our communication was over the phone, usually with kids on my end demanding attention, or he was busy and needed to get back to what he was doing. There wasn't a lot of communication. Mm-hmm. And so now we sat and we look at each other, and he said something the other day about, I really don't like that. And I thought, I wonder when that happened. And I didn't know. Yeah. So you have to go back, and you have to go back like you were when you were dating, that you wanted to know. When you and Maddie were dating, you asked her questions. What do you think about? And she would answer, and you'd listen, instead of saying, "Oh, you're wrong. You need to change the way you're thinking."
Yeah.
You listened to what her thoughts were. She wanted to know your stand on this matter or that matter, and you paid attention. And in your mind, you were thinking, okay, that makes sense. Or you may have even been thinking, okay, I'm going to have to figure out how to change that. Mm-hmm. But, and I say that lightheartedly, but that you listened. We find ourselves, as we get older, thinking we know the other person so well, we no longer listen to them.
Wow. A lot of wisdom there. Listen, young people, right? Listen, people who've been married for a while.
Go back to where you were when you were dating. Remember what you fell in love with them for. Okay. I've told the story before about how I was drawn to Kenny because he was funny and he was so outgoing. What drives me crazy now is he thinks he's funny and he's so outgoing. I no longer think he's funny all the time.
I like how you phrased that. When you met him, you said, I thought he was funny. And now that you've been married for a while, he thinks he's funny.
So, but it changes over time. And he didn't change. I did.
Wow.
And so I have to take responsibility for that. And I have to say, okay, that's one of the traits I fell in love with. Yeah. I have to go back. Lord, give me that renewed heart that I can laugh at those dumb jokes. and I can think, okay, you really are kind of funny. I have to go back to that. And it's not always easy. And it's putting him before me.
But it's worth it. So worth it.
I'll let you know.
That's good.
I'll let you know.
I know there's a couple in our church that you mentioned. They have found hiking to be their thing that they do.
And I never would have thought the wife would have hiked. I just wouldn't have. That was not her.
At our previous church, there was a couple that they were, this was really cool. They were anticipating retirement. They were probably 2 or 3 years away from, their first 2 girls had graduated. They were out, they married, grandkids at this point. And then their last girl was, I think, a junior in our youth group at the time. And they end up showing up at the church with these mountain bikes. I'm like, what are y'all doing? Well, we're going to be empty nesters soon, so we're trying to find what we want to do during that phase of life together. And so they're discovering their hobbies and all that. And so I thought that was a really cool thing. So that's something, don't wait till you're at that phase to try to backtrack, but anticipate it. Try to, a few years out, start rediscovering what can we go and do together. The empty nest doesn't have to be something that you fall into and don't know where to go. Mm-hmm. You can enter into that with kind of a GPS of sorts. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Rada, if you're up for it, tell us a little bit about your empty nest story. I don't have one. I've got little birdies in the nest.
Well, I have 3 children. My oldest is mid-40s. My middle is turning 40. And my baby is 36. So I've had empty nest for a little while. Grandchildren came into it. That kind of filled a little bit of it. But as the grandchildren grow and they get older and they get their own likes and dislikes, then there's less need for Nana to be there. And we're beginning to have to find things that we like on our own. One of the things, we used to enjoy watching sports together. Well, during the time that our kids were little, there was so much chaos going on in the middle of it that we very rarely would sit down and watch a whole ball game together. Well, during that time, Kenny got real vocal with the television set, and it made it where it was no longer enjoyable for me to sit and listen to him yell at the TV. So we have had some conversations about this, and we've had some fights about this, and we've kind of maneuvered it. Well, it's to where we can again sit down and watch those sporting events together. He pulls it back on his criticism. I try not to nag at him when he does let an outburst scream at the television. So we're trying to learn how to do this together. But there is a feeling as the kids leave the house that there's a loneliness. You're used to the chaos. There's a loneliness. It's quiet. You don't quite know what to do. You find yourself sitting sometimes just waiting on them. And that's not the way we need to live this life. We had them for a season, and we have to be ready to let them go, to let them live their own lives. Hopefully they will come back and they will visit and they will love us and they will be a part of our lives, but we can't expect every minute of every day to be with them.
Yeah. It makes me think of Genesis 2:24. A man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. I mean, the Bible prioritizes marriage, and we're not saying that parent-child relationship isn't important. I mean, Ephesians talks about what it looks like to be a good father, to be a good mother. I mean, all over the Bible, Proverbs, it talks about train up your child in the way they should go. I mean, parenting is pivotal. It's priority. But you were first a husband or a wife before you were a parent. Yeah. At least that's the way God designed it.
That's the way He designed it.
In
that's
our
right.
culture, many kids are being born outside of that. But that still doesn't take away the value that marriage should have if you are in that.
Well, and I want to say, too, I think that a lot of times as parents, we have a hard time letting go. Mm-hmm. We want to continue to meddle in our children's lives. And I think sometimes we have to have a slap of reality to realize that that's not our purpose. That's not our goal. And it's a hard reality to swallow, but sometimes I think life dictates that. Mm-hmm. And in that we have to back up and we have to go to the Father and say, okay, Lord, I may have messed this up. So how do I fix it? How do I move forward? How do I How do I prioritize what you want from me now? And you have to kind of take a step back. And too many times we have been so focused on our children's lives that we don't know when to back up. And that's a hard lesson to learn.
And I think that's kind of where American culture's at. We are so focused on children, and we should love our children. I want my child to know that I love both of them. But if they're taking priority over my marriage, then I've flipped the script from what God designed for it to be. I mean, if we have to look at our marriage and ask these two questions, I wrote them down. What brought you together? And then what keeps you together? And that shouldn't change.
No.
If what brought you together, you can't change that. That's already taken place in history. But what keeps you together, if you would say, as a follower of Jesus, well, God is the glue that binds my marriage together. Like if it weren't for him, we would fall apart instantly. At some time, for many families, God is pushed out of the equation there, and children then become the glue that hold us together. And once they leave the house, that glue goes, and you're left thinking, "Oh no, we're falling apart."
Well, and let's go one step further. Let's take a family that one of the parents have died. That mom or that dad still has the empty nest, and they don't have the partner to walk through. And this is one of the things I had the opportunity just yesterday to say to a very dear friend of mine. Jesus promises he will never leave you or forsake you. You're not alone in this. You have your church family that will walk beside you, but most importantly, every minute of every day, you have Jesus right there with you. And I think that we sometimes forget that while single adults struggle with empty nest, and theirs is even bigger maybe than a couple's, because at least I know Kenny's going to come home at night. I know that there's going to be some point that we're going to come back and have a discussion. Those who are alone in life have to gravitate to the Father. Otherwise, you really do have that exaggerated feeling of loneliness, that exaggerated emotion. When you have empty nest, that every emotion you have is exaggerated. The love you have for those kids is exaggerated. The pain you have with disappointment or with when they hurt, you hurt, it's all exaggerated because you've poured so much of your life into them that it's just bigger. It hurts worse. So I think that we all have to go back to our primary purpose is to bring honor and glory to the Lord. Yeah. We have to lean on him. We have to ask him for direction. We have to allow his drawing to us through his word, pull us into what he wants for us. And in that, the empty nest syndrome will not be as exaggerated. The emotions will not be as heightened. The loneliness will not be as big because you're exactly where the Father wants you to be.
That's right. That's right. Man, that is so timely. I'm glad you brought that up. That's caring in a way that, as we talk about this, we don't want to forget about those who are either widows or single. Good word, Rita. Good word. Anticipating it. One thing that I was told early on in my marriage, they said, if you can, as often as you can, take a trip, just you and your spouse, just the two of you. And I know for some, that's just not possible at certain stages of life. For some, that's not going to look possible because of maybe income, maybe the ages of kids and all the things, the busyness you've got going on. But if you can, take 2 days, go find a shady motel and get away for a little while, and just you and your spouse intentionally talk with one another. Remember what it looks like to be married apart from kids for a little bit.
I think that's good advice. I will say this, it's also a generational thing.
It is.
I did not leave my kids.
Yeah.
I did not go on vacation without my kids. And today we see people doing this all the time.
Yeah.
And while I'm not sure what the right or the wrong is, it is a very generational thing.
Sure. Yeah. And that's, maybe we'll see in the next 100 years how that shakes out.
That's right.
But if it is an opportunity to go back
To
and
reconnect.
Let's go for it.
Yeah.
Let's go.
It can just be as simple as having conversations in the evening.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a counseling couple that we have conversation cards that they have to ask each other in-depth questions. Just because, and they're very young, but their worlds were so different that in coming together, they have to have common ground. And so we have the availability to have conversation starters. And it's good to know and it's good to have, but again, it has to be intentional.
It's the word of the day.
It is.
Intentional. All right. Well, Rada, what else would you like to share when it comes to the empty nest side of things?
I just think that communication is the key. If you're not talking, you're not building anything. You have got to have that, whether it's in your relationship with the Lord, or whether it's in your relationship with your spouse, or whether it is just surviving empty nest and sharing with friends. It's important that you communicate. I read here that some couples inadvertently build walls instead of bridges.
Wow.
So that made me really stop and think, and I think that we're all guilty of that to some extent. So we have to be careful of that. When everything centers around the kids, we don't get into those deep conversations. And I always used to say, every time Kitty and I would sit down to have a serious conversation about something, the whole house would just blow up. Wow. And that the kids would come in and they'd need something and we'd be interrupted and the phone would ring and this person would need something or that person would need something. And it's hard, but you have to know and you have to be able to share your hopes, your dreams, your fears, what you really believe, who you are, what you've become over time. I just think that communication is the key to the whole thing. And if we don't do that, we're basically setting ourselves up to have that loneliness and that heightened emotion.
So communication, we cannot undervalue that.
No.
Okay. And we have to be intentional as we communicate.
That's right.
Well, we pray that this is helpful to anybody and everybody. Whether I think of somebody listening to this that maybe they're 25, they've been married for a year, and they don't even have kids yet. This could help be a preparation for
That's
them.
Right.
Maybe they are approaching the empty nest. They're a year, 2 or 3 away. I pray that this helps them in preparation for that. And maybe they have found themselves new to the empty nest or been there for a little while. I pray that this podcast is hope.
Yeah.
The empty nest, it will be difficult.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be impossible.
No, it doesn't. And when you remember what your purpose is, it draws it all back home.
That's right. Well, great. Well, thank y'all for listening. If you are on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whatever it looks like, to leave a 5-star review, a great comment, we would very much appreciate that. And as you go about your day, don't forget to love God
and love people.
We'll see y'all later.